I opened the door. 3 police officers stood before me. "Your garage is to be demolished," they declared, handing me a strange document. But when I asked for a court order, one of them flashed a fake badge. They had no idea they were messing with the wrong person, and they would soon regret it. But let's start from the beginning. I had always been a law-abiding citizen. My name is Tom Harper, and I work as a city planning inspector. My profession rarely sparks interest or admiration. Most people find it dull, reviewing documents, writing reports, enforcing building codes. But one day, this knowledge saved me from serious trouble. That morning, I was enjoying the quiet. A light breeze lazily rustled the leaves. The coffee in my mug was still hot, and the sun cast a soft glow over the neatly arranged houses in the neighborhood. I lived in a peaceful area where incidents were rare, so I was unpleasantly surprised when a black SUV suddenly screeched to a stop in front of my house. The car doors opened almost simultaneously. 3 men stepped out. Their clothing resembled police uniforms, but something about them seemed off. The patches looked odd, and the fabric of their uniforms appeared too new, as if they had just put them on for the first time. One of them, a tall man with a square face and piercing eyes, approached me, holding a folded piece of paper. He glanced at the text, then looked straight at me. "Are you Tom Harper?" His voice was cold, devoid of any politeness. I slowly set my mug down on the small table beside my chair and replied, "Yes." The man handed me the paper. "Your garage was built illegally. You have 3 days to demolish it." I took the document instinctively, but something felt off right away. The paper was too thin, as if it had been printed in a hurry. I examined it carefully. No official seals, no signatures from municipal authorities. Just a name, Randy Davis. I clenched my jaw. Davis was the head of our HOA, a man surrounded by plenty of rumors, none of them good. People said he was involved in shady land deals, manipulated residents, and used his position for personal gain. I looked up. "Excuse me, but who exactly are you? Where is the court order?" I asked in an even tone, trying to hide my irritation. The man silently glanced at his 2 companions. One of them, shorter but with sharp features and a smug grin, stepped forward. With a smirk, he pulled out a badge and held it up for me to see. I took one look at it and knew immediately it was fake. The badge was too simple, made of cheap metal, lacking the embossed details and weight of a real credential. At the bottom, I noticed blurred letters, as if someone had tried to erase them. "We're working under orders from the City Control Department," he stated with casual confidence. Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. These men had no connection to the authorities. This was a setup, a carefully planned scam. A chill ran down my spine. Something was very, very wrong. I knew these men were lying to me, but if I wanted to prove it, I had to be careful. Arguing with them outright would be a mistake. They looked too confident, and possibly wouldn't hesitate to use threats or even violence, so I pretended to believe them. "All right." I nodded and sighed wearily. "At least let me check the garage. If it really has to go, I need to see what can be dismantled." They exchanged glances. The tall one, who seemed to be in charge, glanced at the paper again. "You have 3 days, but you can start right now," he said. "No problem," I replied calmly and walked toward the garage, doing my best to appear indifferent. But as soon as I was out of their sight, I pulled out my phone. Pretending to hold it casually, I turned on the camera. Slowly, I turned around, capturing their faces, badges, and patches. Then the vehicle, a black SUV, unmarked, with tinted windows. I snapped a picture of its license plate. These photos could be useful if things escalated to the police. When I returned, they were still standing by my house, watching me closely. I made a show of inspecting the garage wall, knocking on the metal as if assessing its sturdiness. Then, I walked back to them. Well, it's going to be a lot of work. I sighed. Can I at least get a copy of your order? I need to sort out the paperwork. The younger, cocky-looking one smirked. We already told you. This is an official directive. I held back the urge to laugh in his face. All right, got it. I'll start dismantling. I shrugged. They nodded, gave me a couple more cold stares, then got into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. As soon as they were gone, I went inside, sat down at my laptop, and accessed the city archive, where all construction and demolition permits were registered. I had worked with this system for years. I knew that if a demolition order was legitimate, it would be in the database. I entered my address. Nothing. No orders, no complaints, no requests from the department. Then I decided to dig deeper. Randy Davis, the head of our HOA. I ran his name through the violation records, and what I found made my jaw tighten in anger. He had been caught in scams before. Complaints about illegal fee hikes, withheld financial reports, missing funds from resident accounts. But the biggest red flag, he was linked to property seizure schemes. Several homes and lots in our neighborhood had been declared hazardous, after which the owners were forced to sell their properties for next to nothing. A few months later, those same houses went back on the market, at full price. I looked at the SUV photo I had taken earlier. What if they weren't just making threats? What if they were actually demolishing people's garages, sheds, and structures to clear land for resale? Anger surged through me. This wasn't just fraud. This was full-scale extortion. Late that evening, as I was reviewing documents, my phone rang. Tom, it's George from next door. Yeah, George, what's up? They came to me too, said my shed has to go. I told them my paperwork is in order, and they said I have 3 days or I'll be fined. This is insane. I took a deep breath. Did they leave any documents? Just this one. He hesitated. It's got Randy Davis's name on it again. Tom, what the hell kind of scam is this? I closed my eyes. They were following a script. Intimidate. Pressure. Make people destroy their own property. Don't worry, George. We're going to deal with this. As I hung up, everything became clear. These officers weren't just fakes. They were tools in a much bigger scheme. And now I had to make sure they became victims of their own scam. I knew I had to act fast. These scammers followed a well-rehearsed scheme. They gave people only a few days, leaving them no time to verify the legitimacy of their demands. But this time, they had chosen the wrong target. That morning, I got into my car and headed to the city police department. On the way, I went over my plan. What to say, how to present the information so that the officers would take me seriously. In the office of the captain of the fraud division, I was met by a man in his 40s with a tired but sharp gaze. He listened to my story, examined the photos, then played back an audio recording of my conversation with the fake cops. One of them could be heard clearly, his voice arrogant and commanding. We're working under orders from the city control department. You have 3 days to demolish it. The captain smirked and exchanged a glance with his colleague. We've been watching these guys for a while, but until now we didn't have solid proof. Now we do. I felt a wave of satisfaction. So you're going to take them down? We will, but it would be even better if they came back to you. Then we could catch them in the act. I smiled. Oh, they'll come. The fake officers returned the next day, right on time. The black SUV pulled up in front of my house, and the same 3 men stepped out. Their leader, the tall one with the piercing stare, was the first to approach me. All right, Mr. Harper, he said with a predatory grin. Time's up. Start taking down the garage." I calmly crossed my arms and nodded. Of course. He looked surprised that I wasn't resisting. "But first, your credentials, just in case you're the imposters." The men tensed. The second one, the younger and cockier of the group, stepped forward and hissed through his teeth. "That's none of your business." I smirked and pulled out my ID. "You see, I'm a city planning inspector, and I'd really like to know who gave you the right to interfere with my property." At that exact moment, the sound of sirens filled the street. The fake cops turned in unison. From all directions, 5 patrol cars sped toward us. Their doors flew open, and real officers, guns drawn, surrounded the scammers in seconds. "Jason Holmes, Rick Torres, Steve Murphy, you are under arrest for fraud, extortion, and impersonating law enforcement," an officer announced loudly. Their leader, Jason, paled but quickly regained his composure. "This is a misunderstanding. We're operating legally." "Oh, really?" I pulled out their documents and waved them in the air. "Then why don't you have any licenses? Why are these papers missing official seals? And why are there multiple complaints against you in the city database?" Jason swallowed hard. He knew he was caught. Rick Torres, the young and arrogant one, made a desperate attempt to run, but the officers tackled him instantly. Steve Murphy didn't even resist. He just lowered his head, realizing their game was over. I stood there, watching as they were loaded into the police cars. A rare feeling of justice being served washed over me. These scammers wouldn't be fooling anyone ever again. As the scammers were being loaded into the patrol cars, neighbors began gathering on the street. People stepped out of their homes, cautiously approaching, whispering among themselves, watching the scene with a mix of concern and curiosity. Mrs. Rogers, an elderly but energetic woman with a sharp gaze, nearly ran up to me, pressing her hands to her chest. "Tom, you saved us," she exclaimed with genuine excitement. "Those thugs came to me too, said my extension violated some regulations." Her husband, Mr. Rogers, nodded from behind her. "They told me that if I didn't tear it down myself, they'd send someone to do it for me." Other neighbors began speaking up, loudly discussing their own encounters with the gang. "That tall guy came to me, threatened me with a fine if I didn't remove my fence." I actually believed them because they were in uniform. I listened in silence, and only then did I realize the true scale of this scam. These fake police officers had been terrorizing ordinary citizens for months, intimidating them, demolishing structures, extorting money, and no one knew where to report it, who to trust, or what to do. "They won't be coming back," I said firmly. Mrs. Rogers threw her hands up as if shaking off a heavy burden. "Oh, thank heavens, Tom. Who knows what they would have done next if you hadn't exposed them?" I simply smiled. The next day, I got a call from the news. "Mr. Harper, you exposed a group of scammers posing as police officers. Could we interview you?" I wasn't seeking fame, but I knew this story needed to be told. If people didn't hear about this scheme, it could happen again somewhere else. A few hours later, the news anchor's voice filled the screen. "A city planning inspector has exposed a group of criminals impersonating police officers." The broadcast showed footage of the arrest. Jason Holmes, the gang's leader, looked tense, his lips pressed together, his eyes filled with the realization of failure. The footage then switched to archived reports detailing how this group had terrorized local residents for months. Then, a new face appeared on the screen. Randy Davis, the HOA president. The HOA president has abruptly resigned. It turns out he was aware of the scam but turned a blind eye in exchange for personal benefits. He is now being investigated as an accomplice, the reporter stated. I smiled. He had tried to stay in the shadows, but now he, too, would have to answer for his actions. And my garage? It remained standing, solid, untouched, a symbol of the fact that justice can prevail when you know the law and refused to back down. That evening, I sat on my porch again, a cup of hot coffee in hand, looking out at my familiar street. It felt a little quieter now, a little safer. Justice had prevailed.